Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount. So we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case.
The jury is now hearing about each baby in turn. We've already heard about how 5 babies A, B, C, D and E, were allegedly killed or harmed by Lucy Letby over a 6-week period in the summer of 2015. Today, we focus on the 6th baby in this case.
Welcome to Episode 8, Baby F.
So Liz, we're splitting this episode into 2 parts, and that's because of some delays in the court case this week.
Yeah, so up until now, Caroline, the prosecution have taken around a week to explain the evidence relating to each individual child, which has actually fitted quite nicely with our weekly podcast. But as often is the case with lengthy and difficult trials, they sometimes don't go exactly as planned, and this week one of the jurors fell ill and was too poorly to come to court, which meant no evidence could be heard and we were all sent home for the day. So losing a day meant the timetable of witnesses was thrown out of sync. And as a consequence, by the end of last week, the prosecution had not finished explaining exactly what they say happened to Baby F.
So today, in part 1, we'll explain what the prosecution say happened, and next week we'll explain what the prosecution expert witnesses say.
We'll also bring you more information from the defence and why they say Lucy Letby is not guilty of his attempted murder.
Baby F was the twin brother of Baby E. He was the younger of the twins, born around a minute after his brother by caesarean section. As we heard in episode 7, the boys were born 10 weeks early at the end of July 2015. But they should never have been at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the first place. They were only there because Liverpool Women's Hospital, where they were due to be delivered, was full.
That's right, Caroline. The courts heard that Baby F weighed around 3 pounds 3 ounces when he was born, which is slightly heavier than his brother. But actually he was the weaker of the twins. Unlike his brother, he needed resuscitating at birth, and for a couple of days he was on a ventilator to help him breathe. But by August the 3rd, he was well enough to come off that ventilator, and both boys were doing so well that staff talked about moving them to another hospital to be closer to their home, which was about an hour away.
That didn't happen because that evening, baby F's brother, baby E, suddenly collapsed and died in the early hours of the following morning.
So on the morning of August the 4th, the twins' parents were reeling, devastated by the death of their son a few hours before, and desperate to get their surviving son closer to home. So efforts were being made to try and arrange transport to take him to their local hospital until he was well enough to go home.
But there weren't any ambulances available, and before baby F could be taken away from the Countess of Chester Hospital to be looked after in a hospital closer to his home, it's the prosecution case that Lucy Letby struck again, a few hours after she'd attacked and killed his brother.
They say that, following the death of baby E, Lucy Letby went home from her shift, and when she came back the same day for her next night shift, she allegedly tried to kill his brother, baby F, by poisoning him with insulin.
And Liz, baby F was the first baby who was allegedly poisoned in this case.
That's right, Caroline. In the previous cases we've seen so far, the prosecution say Lucy Letby attacked the babies by injecting them with air, either into their bloodstreams or their stomach. But this is the first time the prosecution say she used insulin to try and kill.
So Lucy Letby arrived for her night shift on August the 4th at around 7:30. And on this shift, Liz, she wasn't looking after baby F.
No, Caroline, she wasn't his designated nurse. Baby F had been moved out of the intensive care nursery following the death of his brother. He was in nursery 2, which was the high dependency unit. Another nurse, who we've been told was a friend of Lucy Letby's and who also mentored her during her training, was caring for baby F. Lucy Letby was caring for another baby who was in the same nursery.
By this time, baby F was breathing for himself, although he was being given a little extra oxygen via a mask. He'd had a few problems regulating his blood sugar after birth and was on antibiotics for a suspected infection. But he was progressing well and doctors were not concerned.
Crucially, doctors who examined baby F around 6 hours before he was allegedly attacked noted that his blood sugar issues had been resolved. And this is important because, as we'll hear later, the blood sugar levels in baby F are at the heart of why the prosecution say he was poisoned.
Okay, so baby F was being fed small amounts of his mother's breast milk by this point via a tube in his nose, and he was also being given extra nutrients intravenously via a line into his bloodstream. Again, this is an important detail in the case, Liz.
Yes, these fluids are supplement feeds that are given to premature babies because their tummies are so small that they can only tolerate tiny amounts of milk. The court heard that at the Countess, stock fluid bags of nutrients, which could be given to any baby, were kept in a locked fridge on the neonatal unit. But bags could also be tailor-made for each child, which meant that the contents were prescribed by the doctors according to what each baby needed. These bespoke bags were put together by the pharmacy and sent up to the neonatal ward every afternoon. And once on the ward, it was then the nurse's job to put up the bag, which involved them attaching it to a line or cannula into the baby's bloodstream and hanging the bag above their cot so the contents could slowly infuse.
And it's these bags, Liz, which the prosecution say were sabotaged by Lucy Letby. They allege that somehow she added insulin to the nutrient bag shortly before it was put up and attached to baby F's intravenous line.
That's right, Caroline. Nick Johnson, Casey, told jurors that at around midnight on August the 4th, that's around 4 hours after Lucy Letby had started her shift, she poisoned baby F with insulin. And around 2 hours later, in the early hours of August the 5th, he suffered what doctors call a hypoglycemic episode, which is an unexpected drop in his blood sugar. He also vomited some milk, and there was a surge in his heart rate. These were recorded by nurses in their routine observations.
And the jury have been told that low blood sugar, if untreated, can cause patients to suffer seizures, interrupt their breathing, and even lead to irreversible brain damage and death.
Yes, this bit might sound a bit technical, Caroline, but these levels are important. The jury have heard that anything below 2.6 millimoles of glucose per litre of blood is too low for a premature baby. Ideally, doctors want their blood sugar to be between 4 and 7 millimoles, but at 1:54 a.m. on August the 5th, baby F's glucose reading was just 0.8, which was described as worryingly low.
So over the course of the next few hours, doctors gave baby F sugar water known as dextrose, and also extra glucose to try and counter the falling sugar levels in his blood. They initially suspected that the drop could be due to dehydration or an early sign of infection, and so they continued to give him saline and more antibiotics.
And by the time Lucy Letby went off her shift at around 8 a.m, baby F's blood sugar was still dangerously low.
At 8:47 a.m, she sent a WhatsApp message to her colleague, who we can't name for legal reasons, but who'd been on duty with her that night. The messages are voiced by actors.
Did you hear what baby F's sugar was at 8 a.m?
No.
1.8.
Shit, now I feel awful, but leaving it 3 hours didn't seem excessive, and it was only 2.5 hours.
Something isn't right if he's dropping like that, with the amount of fluid he's had. Don't think you needed to do it sooner. Got to think of his poor heels too.
Exactly, he's had so much handling. No, something not right. Heart rate and sugars.
Dr. Gibbs saw. Hopefully they will get him sorted. He's a worry though.
Hope so, he is a worry.
Hope you sleep well. Let me know how baby F is tonight, please.
I will, hun.
For much of that day, Liz, jurors were told baby F's blood sugar levels remained low.
Yes, and despite being given repeated doses of dextrose, the medicine had little impact on his blood sugar.
So at 7 o'clock that night, the doctors decided to stop the nutrient feed altogether and increase the amount of dextrose.
And it was only after they did this that his blood sugar began to stabilise.
During this time, Lucy Letby wasn't on duty and she had the night off, so the court heard she went to a salsa dancing class with another nurse, Mina Lapalainen.
But jurors were told that she was keen to be kept updated on baby F's progress, and she asked her colleague, who was his designated nurse that night, to let her know how he was getting on. Messages between them begin with the nurse on duty WhatsApping Lucy Letby from the hospital at around 8:45 p.m.
The messages are voiced by actors.
He's a bit more stable. Seems long line issue not the cause of his sugar problems. Doing various tests to try and find answers.
Oh dear, thanks for letting me know.
He's defo better though. Looks well, handles fine.
Good.
3 hours later, before she went to bed, Lucy Letby messaged her friend at work again.
Wonder if he has an endocrine problem. Hope they can get to the bottom of it. On way home from salsa with Mina. Feel better now I've been out.
Good. Glad you feel better. Maybe re-endocrine. Maybe just prematurity.
How are the parents?
Okay, tired. They've just gone to bed.
Glad they feel able to leave him.
Yes, they know we'll get them, so good they trust us.
Yes. Hope you have a good night.
Thanks. Sleep well.
Kiss, kiss.
Baby F stabilised and eventually recovered, but a blood sample was taken when he was poorly and sent to a specialist laboratory at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, 30 miles away, to be tested. And the court heard that when the results came back a week later, they were very unusual.
Dr. John Gibbs, the consultant paediatrician who cared for baby F, said he'd expected the lab results to have shown virtually no insulin in baby F's blood because of his abnormally low blood sugar. But in fact, they showed the opposite. He said baby F's blood had very high levels of insulin, and hormone markers also found revealed it could not have been naturally produced in his own body. Dr. Gibbs said these results show baby F was given a drug, a synthetic form of insulin, but he was never prescribed this at this time, and he should never have received it.
And Liz, we're going to hear much more about this in part 2, aren't we, from the prosecution experts? But it's significant because they say the test proves someone deliberately administered insulin to baby F in the hospital. And the prosecution case is that it was injected into the nutrient bag. And the court heard some detail about the way the bags were stored.
Yeah, so Shelley Tomlins is a nurse who was working on the unit at the time. She gave evidence via a video link from Australia, where she now lives. She told the court that the nutrient bags and the insulin were kept in a padlocked fridge in Nursery 1. She said it was usual for the shift leader to be in charge of the keys, but admitted that any nurse could request them. Any one of us could ask for the bunch of keys and end up by accident having them in our pocket for a while, she said. It wasn't strictly enforced, and she said there was no log or record kept of where the keys were at any given time.
2 other nurses, Sophie Ellis and Belinda Williamson, who were all working around this time, were also called to give evidence, and all 3 were asked by the junior prosecuting barrister, Philip Asbury, did you, at any point in time, administer insulin to baby F?
No, or absolutely not, they all replied.
But it's the prosecution case that someone on that unit deliberately poisoned baby F with insulin.
And that someone, they say, was Lucy Letby.
So, Liz, there's been lots of complicated medical evidence this week, and I imagine that at times it can be really difficult for the jury and for members of the press like you, who are not doctors or nurses, to follow exactly what's going on.
Yeah, Caroline, it's definitely one of those trials that you can't switch off from for a minute or miss a witness, because each can be the key to the sequence of events and to following what the prosecution and defence say happened. My job when I'm writing for the newspaper is to condense around 5 hours of that complicated evidence each day into a fair and balanced account of the proceedings, and usually I don't have any more than about 600 words to play with.
I know the skill is working out what are the most important points to get across, and this can be just as tricky for us broadcast media as well, who on average have got about 3 minutes to tell viewers and listeners about the day in court. It's not easy to sum up really complicated evidence in just a few sentences, but one person who's been doing that for years and years is Matt O'Donoghue. You and I have known Matt for many years, Liz.
We have?
I've known both of you for many years because, much like the pair of you, I've been on that endless northern circuit of trauma and accident and court case reporting daily for various outlets. I had done a law degree at university, and back in the day, you got paid on the dole for while you were doing work experience. So I touted myself around all the radio stations in the northwest of England and started to learn my trade as a broadcast journalist before getting onto the postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism at the then titled Preston Poly, but by the time I left it was the University of Central Lancashire, how I went up in the world. One of the great things about it was we ran these news days which taught you how to go about taking huge amounts of information and then trying to see the patterns and condense it down into, in independent radio, it was your voices were maybe 45 seconds if you were lucky, and you've been sat in court all day and you have to condense all that down.
That's akin to writing for a Red Top where you've got about 400 words, or the Mail where you've got about 600-700 words, or the Telegraph where you've got about 1,000 words. It's a similar breakdown, isn't it, if you're working on different stations?
Absolutely. And in the situation where you're on a large case like this, the atmosphere amongst journalists from what you might think are competing brands, from ITV and BBC. It's not like Anchorman where they're squaring up against each other. It's quite collegiate. You get these little adjournments, these breaks in proceedings, and everybody files out into what's called the precinct of the court. And, 25 years ago, that was this nicotine-stained, smoke-filled area with coffee cups all over the place. Now it's this sort of very clean, very sterile area, and we all huddle and we go, what's your line? What have you got?
increasingly, I'm sure it was always the case, and obviously you studied law at uni. I know you didn't continue to do that, but there is very much a sense of theatre with the way barristers present their case.
Totally. They're orators, the narrators, the way that they construct the story. And it's theatre. The best actors are the ones who engage on an individual level with all 12 members of the jury. Amongst all of this, the elbows to get into court to get your seat, because, there aren't enough seats for the number of journalists outside, the fact that you're drenched because it's lashing it down and you've had to stand in a massive queue outside court. You have to remember that there are real people at the heart of this, and it's that empathy that actually always engages with an audience.
I agree with you there, Matt, because I think sometimes people say, oh, you're a heartless journalist, you're just there to sell newspapers, you're just there to get the story. But actually, when you're in close quarters with people that are facing serious allegations or families who've lost loved ones, you're in that tightly packed courtroom and you can't help but have empathy for often both sides.
I mean, completely.
Matt, after a long, long day working on a documentary, it's now 8:15 at night. You've been ever so kind with your time.
My pleasure, and keep it up. I've listened to the podcast. I think it's brilliant. I think you're doing an amazing job. And I also know how hard it is to tiptoe that tightrope that you guys are walking to tell the story in an empathetic way without crossing any legal lines. And I think you're doing a smashing job, so keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Take good care.
See you soon, Matt.
Next time, in part 2 of episode 8, we'll hear more from the prosecution experts on exactly how they allege Lucy Letby administered the insulin to baby F and tried to kill him.
And we'll also hear more of Lucy Letby's defence and why they say she could not have poisoned baby F. I'll be in court to listen to the evidence, and you can read my daily reports in the Mail and on Mail Plus.
You can also follow us on Twitter at Lucy Letby Trial, or send us an email at thetrialoflucyletby@gmail.com.
And we'll both be back next week. See you then.
Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of
7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 others.
While she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital.
Letby denies all of the charges over the incidents.
Lucy Letby was the only person working on the night shift. It was alleged in court that their mother was apparently told by Miss Letby, "Trust me, I'm a nurse."
This is a podcast about one of the most anticipated criminal trials for years. It involves the most shocking of allegations, the alleged murders and attempted murders of tiny, premature babies at the hands of a neonatal nurse whose very job it was to look after them.
Lucy Letby is on trial at Manchester Crown Court, accused of killing 7 infants and injuring 10 more at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Cheshire.
In total, there are 22 charges, all of which she denies.
I'm Liz Hull, Northern correspondent for the Mail. I will be in court to report on the case as it develops.
And I'm Caroline Cheetham, a broadcast journalist. Every week on this podcast, we'll examine what's happened and bring you the details behind the headlines.
This is the trial of Lucy Letby.
The case against Lucy Letby is that she murdered or tried to kill 17 babies while she was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England. She denies the charges.
The babies in this trial are not being named for legal reasons, and the identities of their families are also being protected. They're known only as babies A to Q.
7 of the babies died. 10 survived. Each one of these babies was or is someone's son or daughter, and the mums, dads and families of every baby are present in court, listening to every detail of how their child was allegedly killed or harmed.
We'll be bringing you that detail as the jury is hearing it from the prosecution and defence. We're getting behind the headlines to explain far more than the news reports you'll be reading, watching and listening to. And the importance of a fair trial is paramount, so we won't be getting into anything in this podcast that the jury have not been told, because they are the 12 people who have to decide the outcome of this case.
The jury is now hearing about each baby in turn. We've already heard about how 5 babies A, B, C, D and E, were allegedly killed or harmed by Lucy Letby over a 6-week period in the summer of 2015. Last week, we started hearing about the 6th baby in the case.
Welcome to Episode 8, Baby F, Part 2.
So Liz, this is the second part of Episode 8, and we split the episode into 2 because of some delays in the court case.
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. We lost a day because a juror was poorly, and so the court hadn't heard all the relevant evidence by the time we needed to record.
We've already heard that it's the prosecution case that Lucy Letby poisoned baby F with insulin during a night shift in August 2015 when he was around a week old.
Yes, the jury have been told that baby F was the youngest of identical twins, and the allegation is that Lucy Letby tried to kill him with insulin. This was allegedly after she killed his brother, who the court know as baby E.
Lucy Letby is accused of attacking both boys in the space of around 27 hours. Baby E died in the early hours of August the 4th, after she allegedly injected air into his bloodstream, and then baby F was poisoned with insulin.
We heard in the last episode that in the hours after the death of his brother, baby F's parents were desperate to get him to a district hospital closer to their home. The court heard that he was due to go later that day, but there were no ambulances available to transport him.
So baby F was still in nursery 2, which was the high dependency room on the neonatal unit, when, just a few hours later, Lucy Letby came onto the night shift. And the prosecution say that was when she struck again.
Baby F was so tiny that he could only be fed tiny amounts of his mother's breast milk. So this was supplemented with nutrients, which were in a bag up on a drip. And it's 2 of these bags which the prosecution allege were tampered with.
And when you say tampered with, Liz, the jury were told that Lucy Letby allegedly injected insulin into these bags, effectively poisoning baby F.
Yes, we've heard from the doctors and nurses on duty, and jurors have also seen medical records, which showed that at midnight on August the 4th, Lucy Letby and another nurse set up the bag of nutrients for baby F. 2 hours later, his heart rate suddenly surged and his blood sugar crashed to dangerously low levels.
The nurse who helped Lucy Letby set up the bag for baby F was his designated nurse. Now, we can't name her for legal reasons, but she gave evidence to the jury.
She told the court that baby F had been nice and stable during the first part of her shift. But she said, suddenly at some point between midnight and 1 a.m, his heart rate has gone up. His breathing rate has gone up, and both to a concerning level. Something wasn't right, was it? His heart rate was high and his sugar was low. It was an indication to me in a baby that had been stable that something had changed.
Through the early hours and the next day, doctors struggled to stabilise baby F's glucose levels.
Yeah, they gave him sugar water, but it did little to help and his blood sugar remained low.
We've even heard that nurses changed the nutrient bag, replacing it with a fresh bag about 11 o'clock the following morning, but his sugar levels failed to improve. By then, Lucy Letby had finished her shift and gone home.
And this is crucial because the prosecution say not only did she poison the nutrient bag she helped set up at midnight, but before she clocked off at around 8 a.m, she went to the fridge and poisoned another bag. And that was the second bag baby F received.
Liz, it wasn't until baby F was taken off the nutrient bag altogether at 7 o'clock in the evening on August the 5th that his blood sugar returned to normal. One of the prosecution expert witnesses this week was Professor Peter Hindmarsh. Now, he's an insulin expert at University College in London, and he explained why this happened.
Yes, Caroline, he examined baby F's medical records and concluded that a commonly used synthetic insulin, known as Act Rapid, which was kept in the same fridge on the unit, had been given to baby F via his nutrient bag. He said that blood sugar readings taken from baby F between midnight on August the 4th and 7 p.m. the following day suggested that both bags had been contaminated, more or less to the same degree. The insulin remained in a steady state in baby F's blood up until about 7 p.m. when he was eventually taken off the nutrient bag, the professor said.
And only after that did his blood sugar stabilise. Baby F had no other problems and was finally transferred out of the Countess to another hospital 8 days later. And Professor Hindmarsh wasn't the only expert that the jury heard from this week, Liz.
No, he wasn't, and Caroline, as we've heard from before in other cases, the prosecution's two main expert witnesses, retired consultant paediatrician Dr. Dowie Evans and neonatologist Dr. Sandy Bowen, also gave evidence.
And I think, Liz, Dr. Evans made reference to a test done on a sample of baby F's blood, which listeners may remember from last week was taken when he was poorly.
Yes, the results showed that despite having dangerously low blood sugar, baby F's insulin levels were very high. Dr. Evans described the results as striking and really very astonishing.
And in his expert view, this could only have been synthetic insulin. In other words, a manufactured drug.
Yes, he said the only explanation for the results was that baby F had been given insulin from some outside source.
And Dr. Evans also concluded that the insulin had not been injected directly into his skin or muscle, but rather it had been infused more slowly via the bag.
And Prosecutor Nick Johnson Casey asked Dr. Evans, "Have you ever heard of the legitimate administration of insulin by somebody putting it into a bag of feed?" "No, never happens," he replied. And Dr. Evans explained that it was too dangerous to add insulin to a bag this way.
And when Dr. Evans' findings were reviewed by the other expert witness, Dr. Sandy Bowen, she came to the same conclusion.
Yes, she agreed that both bags of nutrient feed had to have been contaminated with insulin.
She also explained why neonatal hypoglycemia or persistent low blood sugar levels could be so dangerous for a premature baby.
She said it could be absolutely devastating for them. She said, initially babies may become a little unwell, but if left untreated, they could go on to have seizures, fall into a coma, and subsequently die. Neonatal fits as a result of very low blood sugar are associated with significant brain damage, she said. Those children go on to have long-term neurodevelopmental problems.
So that's what we heard the prosecution say happened to baby F. Liz, the defence say Lucy Letby did not harm him. But in court this week, they didn't dispute that someone contaminated the nutrient bag with insulin.
Lucy Letby's position is she did not harm or try to kill baby F. But Ben Myers, KC, who's her barrister, didn't argue with the prosecution's theory that baby F was poisoned with insulin via the bag. He insisted, though, that Lucy Letby was not responsible.
The jury were also read a summary of Lucy Letby's interviews and what she said in relation to baby F when questioned by police before she was charged.
She told the police that she remembered the twins because baby E's death had affected her. She denied deliberately harming baby F or injecting him with insulin or putting the drug into his feed. Lucy Letby did, however, ask police whether they had checked baby F's nutrient bag and how they knew the insulin was in it at the time.
The prosecution say she must have been the one to contaminate the bags, and they insisted on calling every nurse on duty that night to give evidence, so they could ask them individually on oath if they had put insulin in baby F's feed.
And each of them replied, no or absolutely not.
We've already heard, Liz, that this trial is expected to last for 6 months at least. In the second part of our chat with broadcaster and experienced court reporter Matt O'Donoghue, he told us how hard it is to report on a long-running trial.
The really difficult thing to do over a trial, particularly one like this, which is so expansive and that goes on for months. I mean, this is, what is it? Something like a 6-month trial. I was thinking about what other cases I'd done that had gone on that long. And I did, I think, every day of a 9-month trial in Liverpool for, it was Joyce and Amos, the two gangsters who ran the Gooch crew in Manchester, who were up for a murder. I mean, it was horrific. It was Tyrone Gilbert's wake, who was a victim of gang violence, who'd been shot. And then at that wake, people were out on the street drinking, and they drove by and they shot at all the mourners and took another one out. And it was a massive trial. It went on for 9 months. There were, I think, 10 co-accused. The dock was full. And every day you're thinking, how can I maintain the interest in this? You're fighting against everything else that's on the agenda that day. And you want your story to be on because you're personally invested in it and you think it's important. Otherwise, you wouldn't have pitched to have been assigned to it in the first place. And every day you start trying to sell, well, this is what's coming up. You have the morning meeting at 8:30 in the morning. This is what's coming up at court today. This is what we're going to hear. Great. And then they order from you. Right, okay, we'll have 2 minutes 30 on that. Live, third in the programme.
Over the course of what, I don't know, 30-year career so far and still going, I know. Any big court cases that spring to mind? Have you covered any crucial court cases that really stuck with you? You mentioned that gang trial in Liverpool.
Oh, God, there are loads that have really stuck with me, yeah. There is one particular one, and again, this sort of feeds into what we were talking about before. So everything we say when we're broadcasting is strictly governed by the Contempt of Court Act, and we've got the Ofcom and IPSO and all the different moral guidelines. And then afterwards, you've got libel and defamation. So I need to start this by saying the two individuals involved were acquitted at the end of it. That is, the jury could not reach a conclusion. And this is the longest jury deliberation that I had ever been on. And I think it was 23 days at Preston Crown Court that jury sat and could not make their mind up. And in the end, the judge said, look, you can't make your mind up. There's nothing I can do. I've given you a majority verdict. You still can't make your mind up. That's a hung jury. You're gone. And they walked.
Matt, I think I know which case you're talking about because I covered it too. This is the case of Charlene Downs, isn't it?
Charlene Downs, indeed. Absolutely. And that case is one that has and always will stick with me, not least because her parents I got to know particularly well. And they would call me up after their day in court and we would chat through stuff. The backdrop of it is a young girl who went missing in Blackpool and was never seen again. And the accused were two guys who ran a kebab shop opposite the drag club in Blackpool called Funny Girls. The contention from the prosecution was that Charlene had been murdered. She'd been groomed. She was part of a grooming network of men who then used her, and then something had happened. She'd been chopped up, and basically the people who went for their kebabs on a Saturday night, was the prosecution's contention, had consumed Charlene without knowing it. And the details of that case were horrific, utterly, utterly horrific. And to have, as you have in your case now, parents who've lost a child, it's so the wrong way around. Nature sets you up so that you just don't ever expect that will happen. And it's on your kids' toes to deal with the fact that you go before they do. And that's why deaths of kids are the ones that really, really stick with you. If you do this job properly, you empathize. And that's the only way that you can do it properly. Otherwise, you become an automaton and your copy has no soul and your broadcasts have no heart. And you feel the pain that those parents feel. You sit in court with them every day. You see them. And then that stuff that they've got to hear. And you think, how on earth can you ever get over any of this? And that's probably one of those cases that sticks. I mean, there's a rake of them. The UCAL Chin, Tyrone Gilbert, killings was something else, but it's always to do with getting to know the family. And I think that's what makes a good journalist, you know.
Matt, thank you so much for your time. So that's it for part 2 of episode 8. Next week, we'll hear about the case of baby G, the most premature baby in the case, born 16 weeks early. Lucy Letby allegedly tried to kill her on 3 separate occasions. She survived, but the jury will hear she's been left with irreversible brain damage and problems for life.
I'll be in court to listen to the evidence, and you can read my daily reports in the Mail and on Mail Plus.
You can also follow us on Twitter at Lucy Letby Trial, or send us an email at thetrialoflucyletby@gmail.com.